Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. So today we're looking at this whole thing with TikTok and a potential ban in the U.S. We've got some fascinating articles here from the BBC and Reuters, so we can really get into like the nitty-gritty of this legal battle, see who the players are, what's going on politically, and then of course what it means for, you know, us as users.
Yeah, it's kind of wild how one app can just become the center of so many complicated issues, right?
Oh, absolutely. And what makes it even more interesting to me is that it's not just a legal case. You know, there's this whole political drama unfolding alongside it. Like, think about it. We're talking about President Trump and his, kind of surprising change of heart on this. First, he's all for the ban, and now he seems to have a bit of a soft spot for TikTok. Like, our sources are saying that he's even claiming it helped him get youth votes.
Yeah, that's definitely a bit of a twist, especially when you consider that he only joined the platform back in June.
Exactly. So, is this, a genuine change of heart,
hmm
or is it some kind of calculated political move?
Well, let's dig into that a bit. To really understand where Trump's coming from now, we kind of have to rewind back to the beginning. When there was that initial push for a ban, the US government's big concern at that time was that TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, which is Chinese, they were worried that they might be forced to share user data with the Chinese government.
Right. So that's where those national security concerns come in.
hmm
But TikTok and ByteDance, they're denying any kind of data sharing, right? They're saying that user data is stored securely and it's outside of China.
Yeah, and that brings up some pretty thorny questions about censorship and free speech. Like if
Yeah.
governments can just start banning platforms based on, you know, where the company's from, what does that mean for the future of the internet as a whole?
It really makes you wonder where the line is,
Yeah.
you know?
Hmm.
But going back to Trump for a second, that Reuters article suggests that his opposition to the ban could actually be linked to Facebook. Apparently, he sees a TikTok ban as potentially beneficial to Facebook. And that's interesting because he's been pretty critical of Facebook in the past.
It is interesting, isn't it? You've got these personal opinions and political rivalries, and they might actually be influencing policy decisions on like a global scale. And then you add in the fact that Trump's saying that TikTok helped him get more support from young people, even though he only joined the platform fairly recently.
Okay, I gotta admit that part makes me laugh a little. It's like he's using the platform to get support at the same time that he's trying to get it banned. The irony is not lost on me.
Yeah, I think it just shows the power of social media, doesn't it? Whether you
Mhm.
love it or hate it, TikTok's a major force. It grabs your attention, people are engaged, and it can totally sway public opinion.
No doubt, but let's not lose sight of the legal battle that's happening here. Because there's a deadline looming. The BBC article says that a law was passed this year that requires TikTok to either sell off from ByteDance by January 19th or face a complete ban in the US.
And it doesn't sound like TikTok is giving up easily. They've already filed an emergency application with the Supreme Court asking them to delay the ban. Their argument is that a ban would cause irreparable harm to the company, not to mention the, millions of users who rely on the platform.
And that's an important point. We can't forget about the real people who would be
Yes.
impacted by all of this. I mean, we're talking about creators who've built entire careers on TikTok, businesses that depend on it for marketing, and tons of people who just use it for connection and entertainment.
Yeah, it's a whole ecosystem that could be disrupted. The BBC article really drove that home. They called TikTok one of the most significant speech platforms in the US.
So a ban wouldn't just silence a few voices. It could silence millions. And that brings up a whole other set of questions about censorship and the government's control over online platforms.
It does, and it all circles back to those concerns about free speech. And finding that delicate balance between national security and individual rights, it's a lot to unpack.
It really is. We've only just scratched the surface. But I think for now, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll delve deeper into the human side of all this. We'll look at how a ban could impact TikTok's diverse community of users. Stay with us.
So we're back, and before the break, we were talking about just how massive TikTok is, how it's become this huge platform for people to express themselves and connect.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to get lost in all the legal stuff and the politics and forget that there are real people who would be affected by a ban. Millions of users, each with their own reasons for being on TikTok.
Exactly. And that BBC article we keep coming back to, they did a good job of highlighting that human side of things. They talked about how TikTok has become a hub for all these different communities,
Yeah.
especially for people who feel like they don't have a voice elsewhere.
Yeah, that's a really important point. It's not just about taking away an app. You could be silencing people who have finally found a place where they can be themselves.
Absolutely. And then there's the economic side of it, too. Think about all the creators who are making a living from TikTok. Sponsorships, brand deals, even those virtual tips. For a lot of them, TikTok isn't just a hobby, it's their job.
It's like their whole world could be turned upside down. And I wonder what happens to those creators if TikTok goes away. Do they just move to another platform? Is it really that easy?
That's a good question, and I don't know if there's a simple answer. Every platform has its own culture and audience. What works on TikTok might not work on Instagram or YouTube.
Right. And can those other platforms really offer the same sense of community? Like, that's a big part of TikTok, isn't it? It's not just about posting videos. It's about finding people you connect with.
It is, and for some users, especially those from marginalized communities, that feeling of belonging is so important. It can be a source of support and validation and even empowerment. To lose that would be a huge loss.
Yeah, I think that's an aspect that often gets overlooked. We focus on the big picture, the politics, the legal stuff. But this is about real people's lives.
Yeah. It is, and it reminds us that technology isn't just about the tech itself. It's about human connection, how we use these tools to build relationships, to share our stories and create communities.
And that brings us back to this whole issue of balance, doesn't it? How do we weigh national security against the impact on individual users? How do we make sure we're not silencing people or stopping creativity in the name of security?
It's a tough question, and there's no easy answer, but it's a conversation we need to be having. We have to think critically about the role of technology in our lives and what happens when the government gets involved in the digital world.
Absolutely. And it's bigger than just TikTok, right? This case could have a ripple effect on the entire tech industry. It raises questions about data privacy, free speech, and how we regulate online platforms.
It does. It's like TikTok is the canary in the coal mine. It's a warning sign that things are getting more and more complicated in the digital world.
So where do we go from here? What could happen with this legal battle? What does the future hold for TikTok?
Well, as we talked about earlier, there are a few possibilities. The Supreme Court could decide to uphold the ban, and TikTok would have to shut down in the US. That would be a big blow to the company and its users. But it would also set a precedent for how the government deals with tech companies in the future.
Or they could give TikTok more time. They could grant that delay they're asking for, so they'd have more time to try and negotiate a sale. Or find some kind of compromise with the government. It would buy them some time, but it wouldn't solve the underlying issues.
Right, and then there's always the wild card. The Supreme Court could just overturn the ban completely. They could say it violates TikTok's First Amendment rights, or that the government is overstepping its boundaries. That would be a huge win for TikTok and a big setback for the government.
Yeah, at this point, it feels like anything is possible. But no matter what happens, this case has already started an important conversation about technology in our lives and the challenges of regulating the internet on a global scale.
It has, and I think that's one of the most valuable things to come out of all this. It's forced us to confront some tough realities about the power of technology, the potential for the government to overreach, and how important it is to protect individual rights in the digital age.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about, but it's also good to be aware of these issues and start thinking critically about how we can shape the future of the internet.
I agree. And as we move into the final part of our deep dive, I want you to think about what all of this means for you personally. How do you feel about this potential ban? What are your concerns? What are you hoping for?
Those are great questions to consider. And when we come back, we'll wrap things up by looking at some of the broader implications of this case and what it might tell us about the future of the internet. So stick with us. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've covered a lot with this potential TikTok ban, huh?
Yeah, it's been quite a journey, from the courts to the real world impact.
For sure. So now that we've kind of looked at the details, I'm thinking like, what does this all mean in the bigger picture?
Yeah, good point. So zooming out a bit, I think one thing this whole TikTok saga shows us is how blurry the lines are getting between, the digital world and geopolitics. It's not just a tech issue anymore. This has become a flashpoint for global tensions, especially between the US and China.
It's almost like there's this new Cold War happening online, and the battle is over data privacy and who controls the tech.
Exactly. And that brings up a huge question. How do we deal with these tensions without stifling innovation and, making sure we're not stepping on people's rights? It's a tough balancing act.
No doubt, it really makes you think about the internet differently. Like it was
Yeah.
supposed to be this borderless utopia, and now it's all tangled up in real-world power struggle.
Right. And the TikTok case shows just how hard it is to regulate this global digital landscape. We've got these giant tech companies operating across borders, different laws, different cultures, figuring out how to hold them accountable and protect users. It's a massive challenge.
Yeah, it's like herding cats.
Yeah.
These tech companies are so quick and connected, it's tough to keep up with them.
Good analogy. And I think another key takeaway here is we got to rethink how we approach data privacy and security. This whole TikTok thing has really exposed how vulnerable our data is, especially when it's held by companies in countries with different political systems.
It makes you stop and think about what you share online. It's not just about protecting your credit card anymore, it's your personal info, your online identity, your privacy. In a world where data is like gold,
It is, and I hope this whole situation pushes people to demand more transparency from these companies. We need to know how our data is being collected, stored, used, and if it's being shared, especially across borders.
so even if TikTok doesn't get banned, this whole thing has sparked a conversation we needed to have about data privacy and the power dynamics of the internet.
Yeah, I think so. It's forced us to face some hard truths about the compromises we make with technology and the challenge of making sure technology serves us, not the other way around.
It's a lot to absorb, but it's good to be aware of it and start thinking critically about how we can shape the future of the digital world.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this. The future of the internet isn't set in stone, it's something we're all creating together. Through our choices, our actions, and what we demand, we can push for a digital world that's more ethical, more equitable, more empowering.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for walking us through all this. It's been really insightful.
Glad to be here, and thanks to all our listeners for joining us on the deep dive.